In the October twilight, Isabella Harrison stood by a wide window in the top-floor boardroom of Harrison Industries' Manhattan skyscraper, finishing up her paperwork as she looked out at the far skyline. She had spent the last 3 years establishing her value at this organization, obtaining her MBA, overseeing the completion of multiple projects, and, most significantly, trying to win her father's trust. The entrance of the boardroom started to open about 4 p.m. Anthony Harrison, her father, came in first, then her cousin Joseph, her uncle Daniel, and his wife Kathy. Joseph smiled confidently, as he often does. Her father said, "Everyone please take a seat," without the normal tone of authority. Uneasy, Isabella sat down at the other end of the table. Joseph flashed his pricey watch nonchalantly. "Today, I have a significant announcement regarding the future of the company," Anthony said. "I have decided to transfer management of the company to Joseph." Isabella was hit by those words like ice arrows. "The board of directors has already given its approval to this decision. Joseph will take over as CEO starting next month." Isabella said, "Wait a second," and the boardroom became silent. "Dad, this is not what we discussed." Joseph cleared his throat lightly. "Isabella, business sometimes. I'm not talking to you." Isabella glared sharply at Joseph, feeling her usual composure slip away. She turned back to her father. "Dad, you promised me. After I got my MBA, you said you'd give me a chance." "Isabella," this time Aunt Kathy spoke up. "We're thinking about the future of the family." "Family?" Isabella scoffed. "I've worked late every day for the past 3 years, sacrificed my weekends for this company. What has Joseph done? He only joined recently." A heavy silence dominated the room. "Isabella, I fully recognize your contributions," her father said quietly. "That's why, in the HR department." "That's enough." Isabella stood up abruptly. "I've had enough." She stuffed her documents into her bag. As she headed for the door, she turned back toward her father. "Dad, I'm disappointed in you. But even more in myself. I trusted you too much." With those final words, Isabella left the boardroom, focusing solely on getting away. Just as the elevator doors were about to close, she caught her father's puzzled expression. She heard someone call her name from behind, but she didn't turn back. Clutching her leather bag tightly, she stepped out into the chilly October air. The streets were gradually filling with people finishing work. Isabella walked mechanically, replaying her last conversation with her father over and over in her head. "Why?" she murmured softly as she stopped at a traffic light. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Messages from her best friend, Christina, lined the screen. "Are you okay? I've been worried since I can't reach you. Where are you, Isabella? Please reply." Isabella typed a brief reply. "Central Park. On a bench." 15 minutes later, Christina sat down beside her, holding 2 takeaway coffees. "How did the meeting go?" Christina asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "It's over," Isabella said in a hollow voice. "Everything? What do you mean?" "Dad decided to hand over the company to Joseph," Isabella replied. Christina exclaimed in surprise. "What? But Isabella, you've been working towards that for..." "Yes, 3 years. The MBA, working late nights, sacrificing weekends for projects. It was all for nothing. But that's not right. Your dad has always trusted me." Isabella grimaced with a wry smile. "I thought so too. But the look in Dad's eyes today..." The emotion in his eyes was more than just regret. There seemed to be a deep sense of guilt lurking there. "So, what will you do now?" "I don't know. But I can't stay here." That night, Isabella began packing her belongings in her apartment. Documents, photographs, keepsakes. Everything seemed different now. Especially the family photo on the living room shelf caught her attention. In the photo, her father and Joseph's expressions bore a striking resemblance. Isabella picked up the photo and stared at it intently. Her phone rang. It was her father. Isabella ignored the call and tossed the photo into a box. However, deep down she began to faintly sense that this was more than just a management issue. "Are you really okay?" It was the second week's morning in Christina's guest room. The morning sun shone through the window, illuminating the unopened boxes. "Yeah. Somehow." Isabella tried to smile, but it didn't come out right. "Christina, don't you find it odd?" "What?" "Everything. Dad has always been about meritocracy. Ever since I was little. He taught me that success depends on effort. Yet Joseph has no achievements. Not just that, the timing of Dad's decision is odd too. Just as I got my MBA and started being entrusted with important projects." Christina put toast on a plate and said, "Family matters can be complicated sometimes, right?" "Yes, family matters. There must be more to why Dad wanted to pass on the company than just business judgment." Suddenly Isabella said, "I need to go back home to pick up some stuff I left." "What? Now? Are you planning to see your dad?" "No. He should be at work on weekday afternoons." An hour later, Isabella stood in front of her family home. She unlocked the door and quietly entered. The housekeeper, Michelle, only comes on Thursdays. It was supposed to be empty today. On her way to her old room upstairs, she stopped. The study door was slightly open. Normally, Dad always locks it. Hesitating, Isabella entered. The large bookshelf was lined with old albums. As a child, looking at these albums was only for special occasions. She picked up the oldest album and began flipping through the pages. Her parents' wedding, Isabella's birth, her early childhood photos, and then the pages where Joseph began to appear. Isabella quickly flipped back through the pages. Joseph started appearing in family photos when he was about 5 years old. There were no photos of him before that. "Ha! Isabella!" Turning around, there stood Rebecca. She had been working at the company for over 30 years. As a secretary, she had been contributing even before Isabella's father became president. "Rebecca, why are you here?" "I came to sort some documents. I have the keys to the study." Her eyes were fixed on the album Isabella was holding. They stared at each other in silence for a long time. Then Rebecca sighed deeply. "Your grandfather always said this day would come." Rebecca slowly entered the room and closed the door. "Mr. Frank Harrison, your grandfather, left some instructions before he passed away." Rebecca handed Isabella an old envelope. "This was left for you by your grandfather, for when you're ready to learn the truth." The envelope was labeled, "For Isabella, when you are ready to know the truth." It was written in her grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a note and another envelope. The note was succinctly written, "Dear Isabella, if you are reading this, it means you have begun to seek the truth. Deliver the next envelope to my old friend and family lawyer, Robert Morris. He will explain everything. With love, Grandfather, Robert Morris." "Isn't he the company's advisory lawyer?" "No," Rebecca corrected her. "Mr. Morris was your grandfather's personal lawyer, unrelated to the company." Isabella pulled out her smartphone and searched for Morris's law firm. The office was located on the Upper East Side. "Take care," Rebecca said, "but make me one promise. Do not discuss this matter with anyone yet." Isabella nodded silently in agreement. During the taxi ride, she thought of her grandfather. He was a calm and wise man, always concerned about the future of his family. Morris's law firm was located on the 5th floor of an old building. Upon opening the heavy wooden door, Isabella was greeted by the office's classical ambience. "I am Isabella Harrison. I would like to meet with Mr. Robert Morris. I'm sorry, but today's appointments are. I was referred by my grandfather, Frank Harrison." The receptionist's expression changed upon hearing this. "Please wait a moment." A few minutes later, a gentleman with white hair appeared. "Isabella, is it really you?" Robert Morris looked much older than Isabella remembered, but his eyes still held a sharp glint. "Frank told me you might come someday. He led Isabella into an inner office. "This is from my grandfather." Isabella handed him an envelope. Robert carefully opened it, and after inspecting the contents, he let out a deep sigh. "Please have a seat, Isabella," he said in a calm voice. "This is going to be a long conversation." He retrieved an old file from the bookshelf labeled Harrison Family Personal Records 1995 to 1996. "There's something you need to know about your father and Joseph, their relationship." Isabella gasped, intuitively sensing that what she was about to hear would forever change her life. "Your father was a law student in 1995 and was dating a woman named Kathy Thompson." "Kathy? My aunt?" Robert pulled out a photograph. Showed a young Kathy. She was a student at the same university, in the School of Education. Isabella gasped again. That spring, Kathy became pregnant. However, their relationship had already ended by then, so Kathy decided to raise the child alone. "Your father was already with your current mother at that time." A heavy silence fell over the office. "That child was Joseph." Robert nodded quietly. Isabella and Joseph were half-siblings, a fact their father had kept hidden from Isabella. 2 years later, Kathy met Daniel Harrison. He promised to raise Joseph as his own son. "But why now?" Isabella asked. "Your grandfather, Frank, knew everything." Robert opened another file. He was concerned that this secret would surface someday, especially when the issue of company succession arose. "That's why grandfather left the letter with Rebecca." "Yes." Robert stood up and retrieved a new document from the safe. "This is the deed to a trust fund your grandfather established, in case you lost control of the company." Isabella took the document. "While conditional, this can be used as capital to start a new business. Frank believed in your talent." "But why didn't grandfather tell my father everything?" "He respected each person's choices, your father's, Kathy's, and Daniel's." "Does my mother know?" "No. Only a very few people involved are aware of this truth." Everything seemed to connect now. Her father's sudden decision, the transfer of the company to Joseph, and the discomfort she had long felt. Her father had feigned the promise of leadership to Isabella, only to let her work for nothing in return. When the time came to decide on a president, his guilt prevailed, and he chose to make amends to Joseph, disregarding Isabella's relentless efforts. "What did my grandfather want by telling me this truth?" "He wanted you to find your own path, not tied to the company's succession, but to pursue your own potential." As she gazed out at the Manhattan nightscape, she solidified her new resolve. "Thank you, Mr. Morris." He turned back. "I will fulfill my grandfather's wishes in my own way." That night, Isabella thought about her grandfather as she looked out from her apartment window. He had always been concerned about the future of his family. And now, his legacy was supporting her new beginning. "I will now explain our company's efforts to reduce environmental impacts in next-generation manufacturing technologies." In a boardroom on the top floor of a Wall Street skyscraper, Isabella stood before 10 investors. 1 year since its inception, her company had steadily grown. The presentation screen displayed diagrams of innovative manufacturing processes. An intriguing proposal. An elderly investor leaned forward. "However, such innovative technology requires a significant initial investment." Just then, the conference room door opened. "I apologize for my delay." Joseph entered with a broad smile. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "I am Joseph Harrison from Harrison Industries," he introduced himself. "Actually, we have been considering a similar project." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Investors' gazes darted between Isabella and Joseph. "What a coincidence," Isabella said, maintaining her composure. "However, our patented technology is already ready." "Of course, our approach is a bit different, more traditional," Joseph replied. The presentation ended as planned, but the investor's demeanor had clearly become more cautious. "Isabella," one investor approached her after the meeting. "Your proposal is excellent. However, competing with a major firm like Harrison Industries. Their technology is different, Isabella responded firmly. And we already have a track record. Back at the office, Christina was waiting. How did it go? Joseph showed up. Isabella sank into a chair, tired. It seems his father's company is trying to enter our business model. But that means… Yes. Isabella opened her laptop. They have a critical weakness. The latest financial report of Harrison Industries was displayed on her screen. Under Joseph's management, the company's performance had rapidly deteriorated. Look, research and development expenses have been significantly cut. They shouldn't have the capacity to start new projects. And, never mind, I can't tell you yet, but rest assured they won't be an obstacle for us. That night, on her way home, Isabella received an email from an industry magazine editor. Your information was very helpful. The article will be published tomorrow. As she looked at the screen, a cold smile formed on her lips. For the past 3 weeks, she had been meticulously preparing evidence of Joseph's sloppy management, traces of fraudulent accounting, and most importantly, opaque financial transactions with Daniel. She had anonymously provided all the evidence to the industry magazine. Gathering information had been extremely challenging. However, many long-term employees, dissatisfied with Joseph's autocratic management, were willing to help. They gradually compiled the evidence together. The next morning, the article sent shockwaves through the industry. Harrison Industries. A muddled management revealed. It detailed Joseph's lack of managerial skills, sloppy accounting practices, and illegal financial operations. Under bold headlines, the article meticulously reported on several dubious transactions since his appointment, significant cuts in R&D spending, opaque foreign investments, and most notably, inappropriate transactions with a company managed by Daniel. Everything was substantiated with detailed documents and testimonies from insiders. The Securities and Exchange Commission immediately launched an investigation. The sight of investigators entering the headquarters was broadcast on national news. Joseph was forced to hold an emergency press conference. Even dressed in an expensive suit, his face was visibly fraught with anxiety. I deeply apologize for the issues raised in this report, he said. Isabella's father, Anthony, was also present at the press conference. Gone was the image of a dignified executive. Instead, a tired old man sat, apologizing for his son's scandal. It was my mismanagement. I take full responsibility for everything. Reporters bombarded him with further questions. Why had he entrusted the management to his nephew, Joseph? What were his thoughts on the treatment of his competent biological daughter, Isabella Harrison? Anthony evaded all questions with the phrase, "This matter is currently under investigation." However, that was just the tip of the iceberg. As the Securities and Exchange Commission's investigation progressed, more severe issues came to light. Systematic embezzlement by Daniel and Joseph, fictitious transactions, illegal transfers to overseas accounts. Even assets hidden under Kathy's name were discovered. Harrison Industries' stock price hit the daily limit down day after day. Long-standing business partners terminated their contracts one after another. Banks began to pull their loans. The board of directors convened an emergency general meeting and resolved to dismiss Joseph as CEO. But it was already too late. The company's reputation had hit rock bottom, and shareholders were preparing for a class action lawsuit. The once glamorous headquarters building was besieged daily by the media, waiting for new scandals to emerge. Meanwhile, Isabella's new company was achieving steady growth. Her developed environmental technologies were setting new standards in the industry. Major media outlets hailed her as the standard-bearer of the environmental tech revolution, and investors were eagerly injecting capital. Particularly notable was her newly developed manufacturing process. This groundbreaking technology reduced environmental impact by 70% compared to traditional methods and had already secured several patents. This technology represented a breakthrough in the very field Harrison Industries had long pursued. Isabella's success was proving to be the most effective revenge against both her father and Joseph. The daughter they had underestimated and tried to sideline was now leading the forefront of the industry. This irony became a quiet topic of discussion among industry insiders. 6 months later, the day of arrest arrived. Joseph, Daniel, and Kathy were arrested on charges of securities fraud and embezzlement. Isabella's father, Anthony, was also charged as an accomplice. The image of them being led away in handcuffs from their upscale homes topped the evening news. Harrison Industries executives arrested, charged with fraudulent accounting and embezzlement. The arrests shook the industry once again. The cunning method of money laundering through Daniel's affiliated companies was particularly well reported due to its sophistication. The trial lasted over a year. During that time, Isabella never set foot in the courtroom, but she meticulously followed every development. One shocking fact after another came to light in court. Joseph had started diverting company assets for personal use shortly after his appointment. Daniel assisted him while funneling benefits to his own company. And Anthony? He had known everything and turned a blind eye. In the end, Joseph received a 5-year prison sentence. Daniel got 7 years. Kathy received a 3-year sentence with probation. Anthony was sentenced to 4 years. When the verdicts were delivered, there was no trace of their former arrogance on Anthony and Joseph's faces. 4 years later, in autumn, Isabella was reading the morning paper in her new office on the top floor of a Manhattan building. The front page featured a bold headline: "The Shocking Truth of the Harrison Family. Former CEO Joseph Harrison's Secret Birth Revealed." The article detailed how Joseph was actually the biological child of Anthony and Kathy, raised secretly as Daniel's adoptive son. DNA test results were published, leaving no room for doubt. Just as expected, Isabella quietly closed the newspaper. In fact, she had been pulling the strings behind this report. Old documents found during the securities fraud investigation, information from Rebecca, and the cooperation of Robert Morris. She had strategically leaked all the evidence to the media. "Are you really okay with this?" Christina, now the CEO of the company, asked, visibly concerned. "Yes," Isabella looked out the window. "This ends all the lies." That afternoon, she received a call from her father. It had been 2 weeks since his release from prison. This report must have been the final blow for him, she thought. "I want to meet," his voice was hoarse. As she entered the restaurant, she immediately spotted her father. The once dignified executive was gone, replaced by a tired old man sitting by the window, waiting for her. "All of this was your doing, wasn't it?" There was no anger in his voice, only deep weariness. "There was a need to reveal the truth," Isabella quietly replied, "to ensure that no one else would be hurt. Joseph, he saw this article in prison." "I know. But he had the right to know, too." Her father was silent for a long time. "I made all the wrong choices," his voice trembled faintly. "When I left Kathy and found out about Joseph, I ran away from everything. And that regret influenced how I treated you. That's why you let me make futile efforts, only to hand the company over to Joseph." "That's right. And as a result, we lost everything." Isabella looked at her father's aged face. The intense anger she once felt was no longer there. "I have found a new life," she said quietly. "Just as grandfather wanted. Frank. My father saw through my foolishness until the end." "No," Isabella shook her head. "Grandfather just wanted to give all of us a chance to face the truth." As they left the restaurant, the evening sky was beautiful. A week after the reports, Joseph's wife filed for divorce. There were rumors that Kathy had fled the country. Daniel tearfully apologized in front of reporters at a press conference. It was all a tragedy spawned by years of lies. Back in the office, Isabella's desk was piled with plans for a new project: Next Generation Development in Environmental Technology. This was truly what she had wanted to pursue. Outside the window, the evening sky slowly enveloped in the cloak of night. The former headquarters building of Harrison Industries was now occupied by another company. However, Isabella's new company continued to grow steadily. It was not just a story of revenge, but a journey in pursuit of truth. Exactly as her grandfather had wanted. You can call me Sally Johnson. I'm a 28-year-old medical device salesperson. This is my story of being betrayed, being saved, and learning the real meaning of family. Montana experienced bitterly frigid winters. I observed the snowflakes dancing in the bitter February wind as I stood at the community center's window. I had been helping here on the weekends for the last 5 years to assist veterans in readjusting to civilian life. This operation held a special place in my heart because my biological father served in the Marines. Andrew Johnson, my father, spent 30 years in the Marines. He was a disciplined military man who was kind to the family and particularly interested in teaching me. My father would often tell me, keeping records is just as important as living, and he instilled in me the practice of carefully documenting my daily earnings and outlays. Despite his strong affection for my mother, he was constantly worried about handling money. Although her pupils respected my mother, Katrina Johnson, for being a superb elementary school teacher, she was somewhat unsophisticated when it came to managing money. As a result, my father was in charge of all financial matters in the home. He taught me the value of investing in tangible assets. Gold never lies, he would often say. In uncertain times, trust what you can see with your own eyes and hold with your own hands. Currency values fluctuate based on the government's decisions, but gold holds its worth through any era. His study was neatly lined with gold coins he had steadily collected each month. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he shared his final wisdom with me. Sally, see for yourself, verify with your own hands, and live honestly. His voice carried profound love. He passed away when I was 16 years old. My mother sank into deep grief after his death. Santos Brown appeared a year after my father's death. He was charming, a successful real estate professional, and seemed like the perfect gentleman at first glance. He approached my mother along with his son, Daniel. Daniel was 10 years older than me, aspiring to be an entrepreneur. He was always chasing the next big opportunity. There was something off about both of them from the start, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. I remember the first time Santos and Daniel came to our house for dinner. I was 17 and still drowning in the deep sorrow of my father's death. But they disregarded that and continued to talk endlessly and cheerfully about themselves. Daniel kept discussing his latest business venture, while Santos spun tales about investing in Daniel's business ideas. But none of it seemed specific enough and it felt far too risky. "Mom, let's take a little more time to think this through," I pleaded desperately. "I believe the investments Santos is suggesting are extremely dangerous." Dad wouldn't. But Santos cut me off. "Sally, you're too young. You shouldn't interfere with decisions made by adults." His voice was gentle, but there was an underlying intimidation. My mother saw my concerns as youthful overreaction. "Sally, you're just like your father. But we need a new life," she spoke to me as if giving advice. "Your daughter has quite the fiery personality." I overheard Santos saying to my mother late that night in the kitchen, "Perhaps she needs professional help to overcome her grief." It was a voice dripping with false concern. This was the first warning sign I felt about Santos. A year and a half after my father's death, they decided to get married. I strongly opposed my mother's decision. "It's only been 6 months since you met him. You need more time." But Santos skillfully subdued me with his words. "Sally, are you truly thinking about your mother's happiness?" He spoke in a gentle, persuasive tone. "Sure, your father was a wonderful man, but Katrina still has a life ahead of her. She deserves to find new happiness." But when I tried to argue, Santos continued, "I've also lost my wife. I know that pain well. That's why I want us to support each other. Wouldn't it be good for you too, Sally, to have a new family?" My mother strongly agreed with Santos. "Sally, please try to understand how I feel. My opposition only seemed to hurt my mother and bring her closer to Santos. Gradually, my relationship with my mother deteriorated, especially regarding how to handle the assets my father had left behind. "Why do we have to sell the gold coins Dad collected?" protested. "Santos says now is the right time for real estate investments," my mother replied. "You might not understand yet because you're too young, but we need to prepare for our new life." My mother began to see my opposition as nothing more than childish stubbornness. I could only silently watch as the things my father cherished were sold off one by one. Santos cleverly drove a wedge between me and my mother. "Your mother is very hurt by your defiant attitude, Sally," he said. "If this continues, it could affect her health." Bit by bit, I found myself alienated from the family. "Sally is just a difficult child," Santos kept telling my mother. "She's not giving us a chance." Perhaps my mother wanted this marriage to succeed at all costs, to fill the void left by my father's death. And so, she started to believe Santos's words. I felt like I no longer had a place in the house, so I immersed myself in my studies and decided to leave home by earning a scholarship. In the spring of my senior year of high school, I received an acceptance letter from Boston University with a scholarship. With my father's educational insurance, I would be able to cover the tuition until graduation. Tears of joy streamed down my cheeks as I held the acceptance letter in my hands. That night, during a family meeting, Santos made an unexpected suggestion. "Boston is too far. If you attend a state university, you can commute from home, and the tuition is cheaper," he said, spreading out a thick set of documents. "Besides, Thomas's new IT startup needs young talent like you. You can be an immediate asset without needing to go to college." My mother looked anxious. "But her father wanted her to receive a good education," she said. "Katrina," Santos interrupted her, "I'm the one taking care of the family now. We have to think about Sally's future. What if something happens when she's all the way in Boston?" At that moment, Thomas chimed in. "That's right. If you join my company, you could take part as a senior executive. There's no need to waste 4 years in college." But I didn't waver in my decision. My father dreamed of me following my own path. I wanted to make that dream a reality. Santos's expression twisted for a moment. "Well, if you end up regretting it, I won't be responsible." Later, I found out that Santos feared my departure would weaken his influence over my mother. He even tried to interfere with my job after graduation. During my senior year of college, I secured a job offer from a major medical device company. It was a sales position, but there was potential to move into product development in the future. When I returned home for Thanksgiving break, Santos voiced his opinion again. "A sales position in medical devices?" He poured himself a glass of expensive wine as he spoke. "Why would you go to college just to become a mere salesperson? Thomas's new medical venture could offer you a role as chief technology officer." "But I'm interested in this job," I replied. "Interested?" Santos laughed mockingly. "You graduated from Boston University with top grades and inherited your father's assets. Yet you're willing to waste all that?" My mother watched anxiously. "Sales in medical devices is by no means an easy job," I said calmly but firmly. "There are times when I'll be present in operating rooms. I'll need to build trust with the doctors, and most importantly, this job involves the lives of patients." "Ha!" Santos scoffed. "Justifying yourself like that is your choice, but you lack ambition. At this rate, you'll live a half-baked life forever." At the time, I didn't realize it, but this was one of his typical manipulative tactics. He aimed to undermine my confidence and place me under his and Thomas's control. Ironically, it was his attitude that solidified my resolve. Investing in gold was my way of honoring my father's teachings and maintaining a tangible connection to him. Every year, I converted a portion of my savings into gold bars and stored them in the safe at my parents' house. In hindsight, I regret that decision. Back then, I lived in a shared house, so I thought my parents' home was safer. The moment my suspicions about Santos became crystal clear was during last year's Christmas break. That day, I had returned home. Since my mother was bedridden with a cold, I offered to help her manage the household bills. While searching her desk drawer for the invoices, I stumbled upon her credit card statement. As I reviewed it, my heart nearly stopped. Over the past 3 months, there were multiple purchases of expensive jewelry made under my mother's name. My mother wasn't particularly interested in jewelry. She only ever wore her wedding ring, a keepsake from my father, and a necklace Santos had given her on their anniversary. What caught my attention even more were the transaction locations: Las Vegas, Miami, and the Cayman Islands. Places I hadn't heard of her visiting recently. The name Brown Holdings appeared frequently on the statements. This was the name of Santos's real estate company. "Mom, what is this?" As I was about to take the statement to my mother's bedroom, I ran into Santos in the kitchen, where he was making coffee. His eyes were glued to the statement in my hand. "Oh, that's just a business expense of mine," Santos explained with his usual gentle smile. "It's more tax efficient to go through Katrina's account. Don't worry, everything's been properly handled." At that moment, Daniel burst out of the living room, dressed in a designer suit. He seemed as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. "Sally, you're just in time," Daniel began speaking excitedly. "Let me tell you about this new cryptocurrency project. It's an innovative platform for real estate transactions using blockchain. Major venture capital firms are already showing interest." Santos, with a satisfied expression, added, "Daniel's new venture looks really promising. You should consider investing." Their voices overlapped, cleverly drowning out my questions. Looking back, it was clearly a staged performance, a perfect act by father and son to dodge my pursuit. That day, I lost my chance to speak with my mother. Then, the event that would expose Santos's true nature took place. That day, I was volunteering at the local community center, helping veterans. At 2:47 p.m., the phone rang. On the other end, I heard Santos's voice. "Sally, there's something I need to tell you. I've invested your gold bars in Daniel's new venture." I felt the blood drain from my face. The gold bars he had invested were the savings I had carefully built up over 5 years, stored in the safe at my parents' house. Only my mother and I were supposed to have access to that safe. It was my father's final gift to me. After being diagnosed with cancer, he purchased a state-of-the-art safe equipped with biometric features, knowing I would need it as an adult. The safe had a 2-step authentication system requiring both a passcode and fingerprint recognition from my mother and me. I had hidden the safe in my late father's study, as I didn't trust Santos. I had believed its existence was completely hidden from him. The main safe in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor held wedding memorabilia and everyday jewelry. Santos only knew about that safe, or so I thought. But, as I would later learn, Santos had skillfully manipulated my mother into revealing the location of the hidden safe. "What have you done?" My voice was barely a whisper, but my inner rage roared like thunder. "Sally, we're family," Santos continued condescendingly. "Daniel has an incredible opportunity in his tech startup. The investment is guaranteed to triple within 6 months." Without saying a word, I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling, but my mind was razor sharp. My experience in medical device sales had taught me to think strategically in critical situations. I swiftly sprang into action. First, I called the law firm that handled my father's estate, Williams & Associates. James Williams Jr., my father's close friend, had always looked out for me. "This is clearly a case of theft, Sally," James said after hearing my story. "We need to act quickly. Do you have all the gold purchase certificates?" Of course I had them. As my father had taught me, I had meticulously recorded every transaction. Next, I called all the dealers from whom I had purchased gold over the past 5 years. Most of them were high-end precious metal dealers in Boston, where I lived before moving to Montana. They confirmed my suspicions. 2 days ago, a man claiming to be Santos Brown had called and inquired about selling gold purchased under my name. The dealers, following standard procedures, had requested identification and purchase certificates to verify the sale. More importantly, They needed the correct answers to security questions I had set up during the purchases. This was a security measure I learned from my father. Thanks to this additional verification step, Santos had failed to answer the questions correctly, and the transactions had been blocked. My phone rang again. It was James Williams, Jr. "I've contacted the police's financial crime unit," he said. "Due to the large amount involved, they're taking an interest. There's a possibility that other victims exist as well." Other victims. Those words hit me like a weight on my chest. How many people had Santos and Daniel deceived so far? The investigation progressed rapidly. As the police uncovered over a decade's worth of investment fraud, Santos's perfect facade began to crack. He had used his real estate business as a front, building trust within the community and then exploiting that trust through various schemes. It became clear that my mother had also been a victim for many years. Santos had systematically withdrawn funds from her accounts, forged signatures on documents, and manipulated her into believing everything was fine. "Miss Johnson, take a look at this," the police officer said, pointing to the transaction history of multiple accounts under my mother's name. Over the past 10 years, approximately $500,000 has been systematically withdrawn. My hands trembled. That amount was nearly the same as the life insurance money my father had left for my mother. Every month, he moved small amounts of money, nothing significant enough to raise suspicion. It appears he labeled it as a family investment trust. Apparently, your mother had been receiving fabricated monthly earnings reports. In reality, the funds had been funneled through shell companies and ultimately into accounts in the Cayman Islands. "Your mother is a victim, Sally," the officer said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But she's safe now, thanks to you." 3 days later, the confrontation took place. After meeting with the police, I returned home to face my family. The officers set up recording equipment, and I stepped into the house where I had grown up, preparing for one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Santos was seated in my father's old leather armchair. My mother was nervously arranging flowers in the kitchen, and Daniel paced around the room. As always, he was dressed in designer clothes and wore an expensive watch. Now that I knew the source of their wealth, the sight of him made me feel sick. "Let's talk," I said, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. Santos's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is this about the gold bars, Sally? You're overreacting. This is a family matter." "Family?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Is stealing from your stepdaughter what a family member would do? Is deceiving your wife a family thing to do?" My mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sally, what are you talking about?" I took out my phone and played the recording of my conversation with Santos. Then I laid out the evidence: the forged documents, the bank statements revealing fraudulent transfers, and the reports from the gold dealers confirming his failed attempts to sell the gold. "Mom," I said gently, "he's been stealing from both of us for years." I watched the color drain from my mother's face as she looked at the man she had been married to for 10 years. Santos finally let his mask slip. "Ungrateful woman," he growled at me. "I gave you and your mother the happy family you were so desperate for." At that moment, the police officers entered the room. They had heard everything through the wire I was wearing. Within minutes, Santos and Daniel were handcuffed and arrested on charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. My mother collapsed into my father's old armchair. She looked smaller and older than I had ever seen her. "I'm so sorry, Sally," she whispered. "I should have listened to you. I should have seen it." I knelt beside her and took her hand in mine. "Mom, this isn't your fault. He's deceived many people." Naturally, my mother began the divorce proceedings. The days that followed were extremely difficult. During the trial, we learned the full extent of Santos's schemes. 10 years ago, he had begun investigating the financial situations of widows and single women as a real estate agent. He kept a list of targets ranked by their assets, family situation, and, most importantly, their ease of manipulation. Santos and Daniel were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge emphasized how they had exploited family bonds and vulnerable individuals, delivering a harsh sentence. The case garnered national attention and became a catalyst for other victims of similar schemes to seek justice. A year after the incident, my mother and I sat on the porch, drinking coffee. We watched as the Montana sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Your father would be so proud of you," my mother said softly. "Not just for catching Santos, for becoming the woman you are today." I squeezed my mother's hand tightly. "Dad would be proud of both of us. We survived, and we've become stronger." I realized that my father's lessons about gold were, in fact, lessons about life. I chose to fight for justice, to protect what was mine, and to honor my father's memory. In doing so, I not only safeguarded the inheritance but also strengthened the bonds that truly mattered.